My son forged my signature on a $600,000 loan application. And the moment I found out, I didn't say a word. Not one. I drove home, walked through my front door, hung my coat on the same hook I have used for 31 years, went to my office, and sat down at my desk in the quiet. And I stayed there until the quiet told me what to do next. Because that is what a man who has been keeping accounts his entire life does when the numbers stop adding up. He doesn't flip the table. He doesn't make calls he'll regret. He sits. He thinks. And then he moves with the kind of precision that comes from knowing exactly what you are dealing with. Stay with me on this one, because watching a man unravel the rope he braided himself. It takes time, but the end of this story is worth every minute you give it. My name is Cornelius Raymond Whitfield. I am 67 years old. I was born in 1957 in a two-bedroom house on Sunbury Road in Columbus, Ohio, to a man who drove a city bus for 34 years and a woman who cleaned offices downtown 3 nights a week and still had breakfast on the table every morning before school. They did not have much, but they had discipline and they had pride, and they passed both to me like inheritance before I ever had a dollar to my name. I put myself through Ohio State on a combination of academic scholarship, work study, and sheer stubbornness. Graduated in 1979 with a degree in accounting. Passed my CPA exam on the first attempt. Worked for 12 years at a mid-sized firm on Town Street before I had saved enough, learned enough, and built enough of a reputation to open my own practice. Whitfield Financial Group, East Broad Street, Columbus, Ohio. A 2-story brick building that I purchased outright in 1993 and have owned free and clear ever since. No partners, no investors, no debt. Just my name on the door and my work behind it. For 38 years, I built that firm one client at a time. Small businesses, nonprofit organizations, church congregations, a handful of local politicians whose finances needed more order than their offices did. I became the kind of accountant that people called not just during tax season, but when things went sideways. When a business partner disappeared with the books, when an estate needed untangling, when someone realized the numbers they had been trusting for years did not reflect reality. I am good at finding what is hidden. I always have been. It is, perhaps, the great irony of my life that it took me as long as it did to find what was hiding in my own house. I live in Bexley, which is a small, incorporated city that sits inside Columbus like a neighborhood that decided it deserved its own zip code, and was right about that. The houses on my street are older, solid, built with the kind of materials and intention that newer construction does not bother with anymore. My colonial has 4 bedrooms, a formal dining room, a back office that used to be a sunroom before I put bookshelves along every wall, and a kitchen that Loretta redesigned in 2004 with white cabinets and black granite countertops that I have not touched since because changing them would feel like erasing something sacred. Loretta Ann Whitfield, nee Patterson. My wife of 36 years. She passed from breast cancer on a Tuesday morning in March of 2014 at 7:42 in the morning with my hand in hers and the blinds open because she had asked for light. She was the most decent human being I have ever known. Not perfect. She would be the first to tell you that, but decent in the way that counts, in the way that holds. She believed in people with her whole chest, and she did not apologize for it, even when people let her down. She would say, "Cornelius, you cannot control what they do. You can only control what you do with what they gave you." I've been living by that sentence for 10 years now. We raised 2 children in that house. Our daughter, Renee Loretta Whitfield Okafor, is 43 years old and lives in Atlanta with her husband Deo, who is a civil engineer, and their two daughters, Amani and Zora, ages 9 and 6. Renee is a social worker. She has her mother's instincts and my stubbornness, and that combination has made her formidable in ways I am proud of every single day. She calls me every Sunday morning, without exception, before she leaves for church. We talk for 20 minutes minimum. She asks about the house, about my health, about what I have been cooking, about whether I have been getting outside enough. She is, in every measurable way, the thing I got most right. And then there is Marcus. Marcus Deshaun Whitfield. My son, 41 years old. 6 feet 2 inches, which he got from me, with Loretta's eyes. Deep brown, the kind that could make you believe anything they were telling you, which I now understand was not always a gift. Marcus graduated from Ohio State in 2005 with a degree in business administration and a confidence that I mistook, for many years, for competence. He went into commercial real estate development in his late 20s, which is a field that rewards the bold and punishes the careless, and Marcus was both an equal and dangerous measure. He married Tiffany Renee Carter in 2018. Tiffany is not a bad woman. I want to be precise about that, because precision matters to me more than drama. She is not malicious. She is ambitious in the decorative sense. She wants the life that looks successful more than she wants the life that is successful. And the difference between those two things is where the trouble always lives. Together, she and Marcus created a world of surfaces. A $4,000 a month apartment in the short north. A leased BMW. Vacations photographed and posted with the kind of care that suggests the posting matters more than the vacation. A dining table that cost more than my first car, purchased, as I would later discover, on credit that was not entirely their own. I had been watching this dynamic develop for years. I had conversations with Marcus, careful ones. The kind of father is when he is trying to say something important without burning the bridge he is standing on. I talked to him about equity versus image, about assets that appreciate versus expenses that drain, about the difference between looking wealthy and being wealthy, which is a distinction that his grandfather understood at a bone-deep level, having never had the luxury of confusing the two. Marcus would nod. He would say, "Yes, sir, Pop, I hear you." And then he would do exactly what he had been doing, because somewhere along the way, my guidance had become background noise. The wisdom of the old man who didn't understand how things work now, who had built his success in a different era, through different means, and whose methods were, in Marcus's unspoken but legible opinion, quaint. The first time he made that opinion audible was Thanksgiving 2 years ago. We were at my dining room table. Renee and Deo were on a tablet screen propped against the centerpiece, joining from Atlanta with the girls visible in the background. Marcus and Tiffany were across from each other. I had cooked everything: the ham, the dressing, the sweet potato casserole, the macaroni. The house smelled the way it is supposed to smell on the 4th Thursday of November, and for a moment, sitting at the head of that table, I felt something close to ordinary peace. Then Marcus started talking about a new mixed-use development project he had been pursuing on the east side of Columbus. Retail on the ground floor, residential above, some office space. He talked about it with the fluency of a man who has rehearsed a pitch enough times that it starts to sound like conviction. Lead investor lined up. Projections strong. Timeline aggressive, but achievable. He was good at the language of these things. I will give him that. And then he looked at me, fork still in his hand, and said, "Pop, honestly, the cleanest move would be for you to sign over the Broad Street building as collateral. You're semi-retired now. The building's under-leveraged. You could put it to real use. make the whole financing structure cleaner. Tiffany nodded beside him. Dale, on the screen in Atlanta, went very still in the way that a man goes still when he hears something that he knows better than to say anything about. I set my fork down. The Broad Street building, I said. Just as collateral, Pop, you'd still own it. It just gives the lender more comfort. Marcus, I said, that building is not under-leveraged. It is unencumbered. Do you know the difference? He shifted in his chair. Pop, I'm just saying from a pure financial strategy standpoint. From a pure financial strategy standpoint, I said, a building you own free and clear is the last thing you put in front of someone else's risk. I taught you that. Silence at the table. The kind that has weight. We'll talk about it another time, I said. And I picked my fork back up. We never talked about it. But I did not forget that he had asked. And I did not forget the way he had asked, not as a son requesting help, but as someone making an assessment of an asset and calculating its availability. There is a difference between those two things. A father knows the difference. Over the following year and a half, there were other moments. Small ones. The kind that, taken individually, you could explain away. Marcus mentioning in passing that he had handled some paperwork using my firm's address for a business registration. Said it casually, the way you mentioned borrowing a stapler. He asked me once to refresh his memory on my social security number for something he was filing. I gave him the first 5 digits and told him I'd text him the rest. And then I did not. He did not follow up. I noted that he did not follow up. I began keeping a log. Nothing dramatic. Just dates, statements, observations. The log of an accountant who has trained himself to notice when the numbers are about to tell a different story than the one being told out loud. And then came the phone call in early October of this year. Marcus, easy-voiced and unhurried, calling to ask me to come to First Consolidated Bank on Mound Street to co-sign on the commercial loan for his East Side development project. $600,000. He said his contact at the bank had the paperwork ready. Said it would take an hour, maybe less. Said he appreciated me coming in personally, that it meant a lot to him that his father was in this with him. That sentence. I want you to hear it. That it meant a lot to him that his father was in this with him. Said, with the warmth of a man who either felt it genuinely or had practiced it until he couldn't tell the difference anymore. I told him I would meet him there Thursday morning at 10 o'clock. I arrived at 9:30. I walked through those bank doors and asked the receptionist to let the branch manager know that Cornelius Whitfield was here to review a loan application before signing. She made a call. 2 minutes later, a man named Gerald Hutchins came through the side door, mid-50s, silver at the temples, dark suit, the quiet bearing of a man who has spent a career managing other people's money and other people's crises. He shook my hand, asked how he could help. I told him I wanted to review the application in full before I put my name on anything. Standard practice, I said. I make it a habit to read before I sign. He said, of course, absolutely, and led me toward his office. And then something happened. We were still in the lobby, moving toward the corridor, and Gerald Hutchins slowed his step just slightly, turned toward me with the careful expression of a man choosing his next words with more deliberation than the situation seemed to require. He leaned toward me and dropped his voice to just above a whisper. "Mr. Whitfield," he said, "your signature is already on the application." I stopped walking. The lobby sounds continued around us. Keyboard clicks, a phone ringing somewhere, a teller greeting a customer. All of it carried on like the world had not just shifted 3 degrees to the left. "Say that again," I said quietly. He said it again. And he held my gaze while he said it, with the steadiness of a man who understood the gravity of what he was conveying and had decided that I deserved to hear it plainly. We moved to a conference room. Gerald closed the door. He turned his computer monitor so I could see the screen, and he pulled up the application. There it was. All of it. My full name, Cornelius Raymond Whitfield, listed as cosigner. My social security number, my firm's East Broad Street address, my Bexley home listed as secondary collateral, and at the bottom of the second page, in the signature field, a version of my signature that was close enough to fool someone who had never studied my hand, and not nearly close enough to fool me. I have signed my name on legal documents for 38 years. I know the pressure I apply on the C. I know the way the W connects. I know the subtle rightward lean that my cursive developed in my 30s and has never corrected. What was on that screen was a studied imitation. Patient, practiced, almost convincing. Almost. Gerald Hutchins told me the application had been submitted 3 days prior and was still in the underwriting phase. Not yet approved, not yet funded. He told me that he had flagged it internally because the income projections on Marcus's development project had struck his underwriting team as, in his words, aspirational beyond the supporting documentation. He had been intending to call me directly to verify consent. When I walked through the door and introduced myself, he said, "I'm glad you came in early." I said, "So am I." I asked him to freeze all processing on the application immediately and to begin documenting our conversation for the bank's fraud department. I told him I would have legal counsel contact his team within 24 hours. He agreed to all of it without hesitation. He was, I could see, a man who had been hoping I would walk through that door. I stood up, thanked him, shook his hand the way my father taught me to shake hands, firmly, with eye contact, with the full intention behind it. And I walked out of that conference room, through the lobby, and out the front entrance of First Consolidated Bank into an October morning that looked exactly the same as it had 30 minutes ago and felt entirely different. Marcus pulled into the parking lot at 10:03. I was in my car, engine off, hands resting on the steering wheel. He saw me through the windshield and lifted his hand, that easy wave of his, that untroubled smile, and walked toward my window. He was wearing a charcoal suit, new shoes, the look of a man arriving at a transaction he considered already complete. He tapped on the glass. I rolled the window down. "Pop, you're early. I like that. Come on, let's get inside and get this wrapped up." I looked at him for a moment. At Loretta's eyes in his face. At the man I had held in a hospital corridor 41 years ago and made promises to God about. "Something came up," I said. "Will we schedule?" And I drove home. I sat in my back office for a long time that afternoon. The room where I used to grade Marcus's math homework at this same desk. Where I sat up past midnight reviewing his college applications and writing the check for his first semester at Ohio State. Where I had taken the call in 2018 when he said the real estate deal had fallen through and he needed $18,000 to cover the gap. And I had said, without hesitation, yes. I took my glasses off, pressed 2 fingers against my eyes until the pressure became its own kind of quiet. I thought about the weight of him the day he was born, the specific, irreplaceable weight of your child in your arms for the first time. I thought about the way he used to fall asleep in the back seat of the car on long drives, and how Loretta and I would look at each other over his sleeping head with the particular private happiness of parents who know they are inside something that will not last and are trying to hold it anyway. And then I thought about that signature on the screen. I didn't want to be right. Lord knows, I wanted to be wrong. But I have spent nearly 4 decades finding the number that doesn't fit, the entry that was moved to conceal something, the signature that does not match the account. I have never been wrong about the documents. Not once. And I was not wrong about this one. The anger arrived the way it always does with me. Not as fire, but as cold. Not as noise, but as clarity. I picked up my pen. I pulled a legal pad from the desk drawer, and I began to write down everything I knew, everything I needed to find out, and everything I intended to do about it. I called Patricia Ellison Moore at 8 o'clock the next morning. Patricia has handled my legal work for 19 years. She is a partner at a firm on South High Street, meticulous in the way that only people who started with nothing tend to be meticulous. And she has enough respect for me that when I called and said only, "Patricia, I need you today, and bring your fraud person," she rearranged her morning without asking a single question. We met at noon. I laid the photographs I had taken of the application on her conference table. I walked her through every detail: the signature, the collateral, the social security number, the income projections that did not reflect any real documentation I had ever seen. Patricia's fraud specialist, a man named Terrence Webb, who had spent 6 years in the Franklin County Prosecutor's Office before going private, sat beside her and wrote in a narrow notebook with the focused calm of someone who has sat in many conference rooms, looking at many documents that told him exactly what kind of person he was dealing with. When they finished reviewing, Patricia looked up at me across the table. "Cornelius," she said, "this is bank fraud. It is forgery. It is identity theft. All three." "I know what it is," I said. She held my gaze. "He's your son." "I know who he is," I said. "What I need to know now is how to protect what Loretta and I built from what my son is trying to do to it. That is the only question I need answered today." She nodded, slowly, with the weight of 19 years of knowing me behind it. And we went to work. Over the next 2.5 weeks, we moved with the precision of people who understand that preparation is the only form of power that does not run out. Patricia coordinated with First Consolidated's legal department. Gerald Hutchins cooperated completely. He had already been building his own internal documentation and needed only our formal statement to finalize the fraud referral. The application was officially frozen. My name was formally disputed. The bank's underwriting team, already uncomfortable with the income projections, accelerated their own independent review and found what Patricia and I already knew. The development project's financial base was built on projections that had no corresponding assets, no confirmed investors, and no realistic pathway to the revenue Marcus had represented to the lender. Howard Delaney, my accountant of 26 years, conducted a quiet audit of every financial connection between my accounts and Marcus's name. He found the $18,000 loan from 2018, never repaid, long since written off in my own mind, but now relevant as documentation of a pattern. He found a business credit card on which Marcus had added himself as an authorized user 4 years ago, a card I had genuinely not thought about in years, carrying a balance of $11,400. And he found a joint checking account that Loretta and I had opened for Marcus during his freshman year of college, an account I had forgotten to close after he graduated, which showed a series of transfers over the past 8 months, totaling $6,200. None of those transfers bore my authorization. They bore only his access. I had forgotten that account existed. He had not. That is the thing that settled on me with the weight of something final. Not the large fraud, the signature, the $600,000, the enormity of that, but the small, patient, long-running use of an old account that I had simply overlooked. It told me something about the quality of his attention, about how long he had been looking at what I had and calculating what he could take without my noticing. The $600,000 loan was not an impulsive act. It was the culmination of a practice that had been running for years, testing what I would catch. testing what I would excuse, testing what I would let pass because he was my son and fathers are inclined to let things pass. He had read me correctly on every small thing, and then he had overreached. I closed the credit card. I closed the joint account. Howard prepared a comprehensive accounting of all monies owed, going back to 2018, documented to the standard required for civil proceedings. And then I did something that required more discipline than any of the legal preparation. I called Marcus on a Tuesday evening and spoke to him the way I always speak to him. Easy, present, unhurried. "Hey, Pop. Hey, how's Tiffany? She's good. She's good. Hey, about that bank appointment. My guy there said the timeline's still workable. We should probably lock in a new date." "Sure," I said. "Just let me know when works." "Will do." "You good?" "I'm good," I said. "Talk soon." And I set the phone down and went back to reviewing the documents on my desk. Meanwhile, Marcus was living the life of a man who believes his plan has already succeeded. Renee, who follows her brother on social media with the dutiful attention of a sibling who has learned to read between his captions, kept me informed without knowing she was doing so. New furniture had arrived at the Short North apartment: a sectional sofa, a dining set with upholstered chairs, a glass coffee table that Renee described to me as very fancy, Daddy. Very, very fancy. Marcus had attended what his Instagram account described as a pre-development celebration dinner at a restaurant in the Short North where the prix-fixe menu runs well north of $200 per person. He had posted a photograph from the table: dark wood, candlelight, wine glasses, his hand raised in what appeared to be a toast. He was celebrating a loan that had not been approved, spending money against a credit line built on my forged name, raising a glass to a future that he had constructed on a foundation he had stolen. Every time I saw those posts, something in me grew more still, not more angry, more still, because I already knew the table was set. I just had not yet chosen the evening. I just had not yet chosen the evening. Terrence Webb brought me something I had not anticipated and probably should have. Through public records filings in Franklin County, he had located a complaint submitted in 2019 and subsequently withdrawn by a 71-year-old retired teacher named Curtis Beaumont of Westerville, Ohio. Mr. Beaumont had been an early investor in one of Marcus's previous development projects. He had alleged that Marcus used his personal identifying information, his name, a partial social security number, to secure a vendor credit line without his knowledge or consent. The complaint was withdrawn after what public records suggested was a private settlement between Mr. Beaumont's family and Marcus's attorney. It had not been sealed. It had simply been settled quietly and allowed to fade. I sat with that document for 2 full evenings, alone in my office with the lamp on and the rest of the house dark, because the Curtis Beaumont filing changed the nature of what I was looking at. It changed it from a crisis to a pattern. And a pattern, in accounting as in life, tells you something fundamentally different than a single anomalous entry. A single anomalous entry might be an error. A pattern is a method. A pattern is intentional. A pattern means that somewhere inside my son, there was a part of him that had looked at older men who trusted him and made a deliberate decision about what that trust was worth and how to spend it. He had done it to a stranger first, tested it, refined it, and then he had come home. I did not sleep those 2 evenings, but I was not restless. There is a kind of wakefulness that is not agitation, but preparation. The mind organizing itself, sorting the sequence, checking that every element is in its proper place before the machine is set in motion. That is what those nights were. The final review before the final move. By the end of November, Patricia had 2 legal instruments prepared and ready. A civil fraud claim, fully documented and ready for filing, and a formal demand letter that could be served at the moment of my choosing. The bank's fraud referral was already moving through the system on its own timeline, which meant that certain things were going to happen to Marcus, regardless of what I chose to do privately. But the timing of the public moment, the moment where the truth was seen by the people who needed to see it, that belonged to me. Marcus called me on a Friday evening in mid-November, easy, unburdened. The voice of a man who checks in with his father because it is part of the routine, not because he has any particular reason to believe the routine has changed. "Pop, Christmas dinner at your place this year? Me and Tiff, Renee's flying in with Deo and the girls. It would be good. Real family Christmas." I looked at the dining room from where I was standing in the kitchen. That table. Loretta's table. The table where this family has prayed together and argued together and come back together after every distance this life has put between us. "Christmas dinner," I said. "Of course. I'll cook." "Perfect." His voice was warm, easy, perfectly, devastatingly easy. "And hey, we should probably nail down the bank thing before the holidays." My contact there said the timeline's getting tight. "Don't worry about the timeline," I said. "I'll handle it." I meant every word of that in ways that would take him until Christmas Eve to begin to understand. Patricia and I finalized the plan in the first week of December. She would attend Christmas dinner as a guest. She and Harold had joined my table before, and there would be nothing unusual in her presence. She would bring the documents. Terrence had arranged for the bank's formal fraud notification to be delivered to Marcus's apartment by certified mail on December 23rd, the day before the dinner, not 2 weeks before, not the morning of, the day before. I wanted him to have that letter in his hands. I wanted him to spend 24 hours carrying the knowledge that something had shifted, without knowing the full shape of what was waiting for him on the other side of my front door. Because I knew my son. I knew that given 24 hours of uncertainty, Marcus would make the choice that Marcus always made. He would construct a story. He would straighten his tie and lift his chin and walk into my house with the confidence of a man who had decided that the best response to being caught was to perform the act of not being caught. He would be charming and warm and attentive. He would help set the table. He would compliment the food. And I would let him. On the evening of December 22nd, I called him one last time. "Dinner's at 6 tomorrow. Come at 5:30. Help me set the table." "Yes, sir." Easy. Clean. I let a breath pass. "Marcus," I said. "Yeah, Pop. Is there anything you want to tell me before tomorrow? Anything you want to clear up between us?" A silence. Shorter than a full second. Shorter than it needed to be to mean what it would have needed to mean. "No, sir. Everything's good. Why?" "Just asking," I said. "You know the door is always open. You can always tell me the truth." "I know, Pop. I know that." His voice was steady. Practiced in its steadiness, if I was being honest with myself, which I have been trying to be for 67 years. "See you tomorrow. Love you. Love you too," I said. And I set the phone down. The door of mercy does not close with a bang. That is what people do not understand about it. It closes the way a well-built door closes, smoothly, completely, with a quiet that is more final than any noise could be. I sat with that quiet for a long moment. Then I went to the kitchen and checked on the cornbread dressing. Adjusted the temperature, wiped the counter, turned off the light. The house held the smell of the meal that was coming, of everything I had built and kept and refused to surrender, of Loretta, who was present in every room I had loved her in. I went to my office, opened the desk drawer, reviewed the folder one final time, every tab, every page, every number in its proper column, put it back, closed the drawer, went to bed. And for the first time in 2 months, I slept all the way through to morning. Now let me ask you something, and I want you to think about it honestly. If you were in my position, if you had built a life with your own hands, raised a child in that life, and discovered that child had looked at everything you built and decided to use your name, without your permission to take what was not his, would you have handled it privately? Just the two of you, no witnesses, no audience? Or would you have let the whole truth be seen by every person who needed to see it? Drop your answer below, because the answer I arrived at took me longer than I expected, and it cost me something to get there. Now let me take you to that Christmas table. Christmas Eve in Bexley arrives the way it always has in my memory. Quietly, with intention, the way things arrive when they have been anticipated long enough to become something close to sacred. The neighborhood puts on its best face in December. The Henderson family across the street sets up their nativity scene the first weekend of the month and leaves the light on inside the stable all night, every night, until New Year's. The Pattersons next door have the same wreath they have been hanging since Bill Clinton was in office. And there's something I've always respected about that kind of faithfulness to a small tradition. My house gets white lights on the porch railing. Nothing more, nothing less. Loretta decided that in 1989, said that simplicity was its own kind of elegance. And I've not deviated from it in 35 years. I was up at 5:30 that morning. Not because I had to be, because I wanted to be. Because there is a particular peace in the house before anyone else arrives in it. When the rooms belong entirely to you and the work of your hands, and you can move through them without explaining yourself to anyone. I make coffee. Put on a record, Sam Cooke, the live album. The one Loretta used to say was the sound of a man who knew exactly who he was and saw no reason to apologize for it. I stood at the kitchen window with my cup and watched the December dark thin out slowly over the backyard, over the oak tree that Loretta planted the year we moved in, which is now tall enough that its upper branches clear the roofline. I thought about her. I think about her every morning, but on mornings like this one, holiday mornings, family mornings, the mornings that used to belong to both of us, the thinking has a different texture, more specific. I could hear her voice in the kitchen, directing traffic, assigning tasks, making the kind of organized chaos that large meals require feel effortless because she was the engine behind all of it. I could see her arranging the centerpiece on the dining room table. She always did the centerpiece herself, never trusted anyone else with it, and stepping back to look at it with that particular critical squint she had, adjusting one thing, then stepping back again. I set my cup down and went to the dining room, pulled out the good china, the set we bought together in 1991 at an estate sale in Granville, white with a thin gold rim, 12-place settings, kept in a cabinet I opened perhaps 4 times a year. I set the table myself, took my time with it, folded the napkins the way Loretta folded them, in a shape she called a bishop's hat that I had to look up on YouTube 2 years after she passed, because I had watched her do it 100 times and somehow never memorized the folds. I placed the centerpiece she would have approved of, white candles, fresh greenery from the yard, a few small ornaments in gold and deep red. Then I went to the kitchen and I cooked. The ham had been in the oven since the night before on a low, slow heat, the way my mother used to do it, with a glaze of brown sugar and whole grain mustard and a splash of apple cider that caramelizes into something that fills the whole house. The cornbread dressing, Loretta's recipe, the one I have made from memory for 10 years now, had been assembled the previous afternoon and needed only its final hour in the oven. The sweet potato casserole, the green beans with smoked turkey neck, which require patience and cannot be rushed. The macaroni and cheese, baked, 5 cheeses, the top layer browned to exactly the right shade, which I have learned over many decades is a matter of about 4 minutes and full attention. I cooked all of it with the focused calm of a man who understands that what is happening in his kitchen and what is happening in his dining room later that evening are both, at their core, about the same thing: preparation, care, precision, the refusal to cut corners on anything that matters. Patricia Ellison Moore and her husband Harold arrived at 4 o'clock. I had called her the week before and told her the evening structure in full. She had listened without interruption, which is one of the things I have always valued about Patricia. She understands when a plan is complete and does not feel the need to revise it simply to have contributed. She brought the document folder in her bag, the final organized version, and when I showed her where I had placed mine in the desk drawer of my office, she set hers beside it without comment. 2 copies, both complete, both ready. Harold shook my hand at the door and said, "Cornelius, whatever happens tonight, you are handling this with more class than most men could manage." I thanked him and told him to get a plate of something from the kitchen because dinner was still 2 hours away, and I knew he had not eaten lunch. He laughed the way Harold always laughs, with his whole chest, and went to find the cheese and crackers I had left on the kitchen counter for exactly this purpose. Renee and Deo arrived at 4:45 with Amani and Zora, who came through my front door in matching red dresses and immediately began asking about the dessert situation with the directness that only 6- and 9-year-olds can get away with. I told them there was peach cobbler in the kitchen and sweet potato pie, and that they could have neither until after dinner, which they accepted with the dignified disappointment of people who knew the rules and were simply confirming they had not changed. I held both of them for a long moment. Imani, who's 9 and already developing that particular Whitfield stubbornness, hugged me back with her full attention. Zora, who is 6 and has her grandmother's eyes in a way that still catches me sometimes without warning, pressed her face against my shoulder and said, "Grandpa, your house smells like Christmas." "That's because it is Christmas," I said. Renee pulled me into the kitchen while Deo took the girls to the living room. She looked at me with her mother's eyes and said, "Daddy, how are you, really?" "I'm all right," I said. She studied me for a moment. Renee is a social worker. She has spent 20 years reading people's silences, and she knows mine better than anyone alive. She knew something was different in my voice when I had called her 3 weeks prior. Not what, but that something was. She had not pushed. She had simply said, "I'll be there Christmas Eve, Daddy," and left it there. "Patricia's here," she said. "She's my guest," I said. Renee looked at me for another moment. Then she nodded once and said, "Okay," and she went to stir the green beans because she knew that was what the moment required, and she is, in every way that counts, her mother's daughter. Marcus and Tiffany arrived at 5:47, 30 minutes late, which for Marcus was actually an improvement. He came through the front door in a charcoal suit, different from the one he had worn to the bank in October, but the same quality, the same intention, with Tiffany beside him in a burgundy dress and heels that were perhaps optimistic for a family dinner in Bexley, but were very much on brand for who she was trying to be. Marcus was carrying a bottle of wine, which he presented to me at the door with the flourish of a man who had already decided how the evening was going to go. "Pop," he embraced me, held it a beat longer than usual. I noted that. "Marcus," I patted his back. Twice, the way I have always patted his back. He stepped inside, looked around at the table, at the candles, at the good china. "You went all out," he said. with the warm approval of a man who considers himself to be the occasion. "It's Christmas," I said. "Come help me set the water glasses." He followed me to the kitchen. And for 40 minutes, Marcus Deschamps Whitfield moved through my house with the ease of a man who had received a certified letter the previous afternoon and had decided that the correct response to that letter was to behave as though it did not mean what it said. I had anticipated exactly this. He had received the bank's formal fraud notification. He knew the application had been flagged. He knew something was moving against him, and he had made the calculation. The same calculation he had been making his entire adult life when the numbers got uncomfortable. That confidence was a form of deflection, and that if he walked in here warm enough and smooth enough, the evening would smooth itself out. He helped carry dishes to the table. He poured wine for the adults. He got down on the floor of the living room with Imani and Zora and played some kind of card game for 15 minutes, and he was good with them. That part was genuine, I believe. He kissed Tiffany on the cheek when she said something funny. He told Deo he looked good, asked about a project Deo had mentioned in passing at Thanksgiving. He was performing, but the performance was practiced enough that it had absorbed some real warmth into itself, the way a long-practiced lie eventually contains traces of the truth it was built to replace. I watched all of it from my position at the kitchen doorway, quietly, with the patience of a man who has been waiting since October for exactly this evening and has no intention of spending it any other way. We sat down at 6 o'clock. I said grace. A real one, not the short, perfunctory version I use when I am hungry and distracted, but the full one, the one my father used to say on the significant evenings, the one that names what you are grateful for specifically and asks for the wisdom to protect it. I felt Marcus shift in his chair slightly during the part about wisdom. I kept my eyes closed. The meal began. If you have ever sat at a table knowing what you know and watched someone across from you eat your food and drink your wine and tell your grandchildren a story about something that happened to them last summer, if you have ever held that knowledge inside you like a stone in a closed fist while the conversation moved around you like water around a rock, then you understand what the first 45 minutes of that dinner were. Marcus talked about real estate, about the East Side project, which he described with all the specificity and confidence of a man who had not received a fraud notification 26 hours prior. He talked about projected returns, about the development timeline, about a meeting he had scheduled in January with a potential anchor tenant. Tiffany chimed in with the decorative details, the design aesthetic they had chosen for the residential units, the rooftop space, the vision. Deo asked a few polite questions. Renee ate her cornbread dressing and looked at me once, briefly, and then looked back at her plate. Patricia ate her meal, said very little. She is a woman who has sat in enough rooms where something important was about to happen that she has learned to conserve herself for the moment that requires her. I ate. I asked Imani about her reading. I asked Zora what she wanted to be for Halloween next year, which made Renee say, "Daddy, it's Christmas," and everyone laugh. I refilled water glasses. I passed the macaroni. I was, to all appearances, a 67-year-old man having Christmas dinner with his family. And then Marcus poured the last of the wine into his glass, set the bottle down, and said, "You know, Pop, I'm glad we're all here. I really am. There's nowhere I'd rather be than at this table." He raised his glass slightly. Not quite a toast, just a gesture. An invitation for warmth to meet him where he was standing. Tiffany smiled beside him. Deo smiled politely. Imani and Zora were at that point more interested in their cobbler prospects than in adult sentiment. I set my fork down. I looked at my son, and I said, "Marcus, I'm glad you're here too." I want to say something before we bring out the dessert, if everyone will give me a moment. The table settled. The way tables do when the person at the head of them speaks with a particular quality of intention. Renee went very still. Patricia set her napkin on the table with a quietness that was its own kind of signal. Marcus looked at me with his mother's eyes and a smile that had not yet decided whether to stay or go. "I've been thinking a lot lately," I said, "about what it means to build something, about how long it takes, about what you have to give up along the way, the vacations you don't take, the years you put in before the returns come back, the mornings you get up before the sun because the work requires it. I've been thinking about your grandfather, who drove a city bus for 34 years and never once complained about the hours. About your grandmother, who cleaned offices at night and had breakfast on the table every morning. About your mother, who stretched every dollar this family had until it covered what we needed it to cover. About everything that went into building the name Whitfield into something that means something in the city." Marcus's smile had made its decision. It was still there, but thinner now. Thinner and more careful. "I've also been thinking," I said, "about responsibility. About what we owe to what we inherit. And about what it means when someone takes a name that was built by other people's sacrifice, and uses it without permission." The table was completely quiet. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and placed a folded document on the table in front of me. Then I looked at Marcus directly and said, "I was at First Consolidated Bank on Mound Street on October 14th. I arrived 30 minutes before you did. And the branch manager told me that my signature was already on your loan application. 3 days before I had agreed to sign anything." The smile left Marcus's face the way heat leaves a room when the furnace stops. Not all at once, but in a way that becomes unmistakable within seconds. "Pop," he started. "I am not finished," I said, quietly, without raising my voice by a single degree. "I want you to hear everything I have to say before you respond. That is the courtesy I am giving you, and I am giving it because this is my table, and courtesy is what we do here." Tiffany had set her fork down. Renee had not moved. Deo had placed his hand over Renee's on the table. Harold was looking at his plate. Patricia was looking at Marcus with the professional stillness of someone who has seen this moment before and knows exactly how it unfolds. I unfolded the document in front of me. It was the first page of a tabbed folder, the comprehensive record that Patricia and Terrence and Howard had assembled over 6 weeks of careful, documented, irrefutable work. "This is the loan application," I said. "Page 2 has the signature, my name, my social security number, my firm's address, my home listed as collateral. None of it authorized by me, none of it discussed with me, none of it anything other than what it is, which is fraud." I turned to the next tab. "This is a record of withdrawals from a joint account that your mother and I opened for you in 2001, when you started at Ohio State, an account I had forgotten existed. You had not forgotten. Over the past 8 months, $6,200 was withdrawn from that account, an amount small enough not to trigger a notice. The account is now closed. Next tab. This is the statement from the business credit card on which you added yourself as an authorized user 4 years ago. Current balance, $11,400. Card is closed. Next tab. This is the formal accounting of the $18,000 I loaned you in 2018, with interest calculated at the rate we discussed, which you may recall was 0%, because you were my son and I trusted you. The total is still $18,000. It is now part of a civil claim." I looked up from the folder. Marcus was sitting in the chair, the way a man sits when the ground has opened under him and he has not yet begun to fall. Still upright, still technically present, but with something essential gone from behind his eyes. Tiffany had her hand over her mouth. She was not performing. Whatever she had known or not known about the details of her husband's methods, the full accounting laid out on a Christmas dinner table in front of his father and his sister and his brother-in-law and his nieces, that was landing on her in real time. "Daddy," Renee said softly. "It's all right, baby," I said, without looking away from Marcus. "Let me finish." I closed the folder. "Patricia," I said. Patricia reached into her bag and placed 2 envelopes on the table. She slid one toward Marcus. "This is a formal civil fraud claim, filed this past Monday with the Franklin County Court of Common Pleas," she said. Her voice was the voice of 19 years of professional precision. "It encompasses the loan application, the unauthorized account activity, the credit card balance, and the 2018 loan. The claim has been served. You will need legal representation." She slid the second envelope toward Tiffany. "This one is informational only. It contains documentation of the bank's independent fraud referral, which was submitted to law enforcement on December 18th. That process is moving on its own timeline and is outside the scope of anything we're discussing here tonight." The room held the particular silence of people who are processing the difference between what they expected an evening to be and what it has become. Marcus looked at the envelope in front of him. Then he looked at me. And then he did what I knew he would do, because I have known him for 41 years and I know how he moves when the ground shifts. He leaned forward. He spread his hands on the table, and he began. "Pop, I can explain all of this. That application, I was going to tell you about it. I just needed to get the structure in place first. I didn't think you'd object once you saw the full picture. I was going to bring you the projections and, Marcus," I said. He stopped. "I gave you the chance to tell me the truth on December 22nd, on the phone. I asked you directly if there was anything you wanted to clear up before tonight. You told me everything was good." His mouth opened, closed. "I also gave you the chance in October, when I drove away from that bank parking lot instead of walking inside and confronting you in the lobby. I gave you 2 months to come to me. You chose to keep the plan running." I paused. "I want you to understand that I am not doing this to humiliate you. I am doing this because everything in that folder belongs to a pattern that I cannot allow to continue. Not for my sake only, for yours. Because the road you are on does not end anywhere good, and I will not be the road it runs on." Marcus's jaw tightened. The first flash of something defensive moving through him. "You had Patricia here. You set this whole thing up like what?" I said. My voice was still level, still measured. "Like a man who found out his son forged his name on a $600,000 loan application and took the appropriate steps to protect what he spent his whole life building? Yes, that is exactly what I did." Tiffany had begun to cry quietly, not dramatically. The quiet kind of crying that happens when something true has entered a room that has been running on something false for long enough that the truth feels like a physical event. Renee reached across the table and put her hand over mine. She did not say anything. She did not need to. "There is one more thing," I said. I looked at Marcus steadily. "I am aware of Curtis Beaumont in Westerville. 2019. Something moved across Marcus's face that I had not seen there before. Something past defensiveness. Something that looked for just a moment like the face of a man who finally understands the full scope of what he is standing in. He said nothing. "I am telling you that I know," I said, "not to use it as a weapon, but because you need to understand that I've known for some time what kind of choices you have been making. And none of those choices happened because you needed the money. They happened because you decided that other people's trust was a resource available for your use. That is the thing I cannot fix for you. That is the thing only you can decide to address. I stood up. Imani and Zora were both quiet now, sensing the gravity of something they were too young to fully parse, both of them looking at me with wide, careful eyes. I looked at them and softened my face deliberately. For them, I would like for the children to have their cobbler, I said. And I would like for this evening to end with some measure of dignity for everyone at this table. That is still possible. But Marcus, I need you to hear this clearly before we do anything else. I held his gaze. My name is not a resource. My credit is not a resource. My house and my firm and everything your mother and I built over 36 years. Together, none of that is available for use without my knowledge and my consent. That was true before tonight. It will remain true, and I will defend it with every legal tool available to me, which are, as you can see, considerable. I picked up my napkin, placed it beside my plate, looked at Marcus one final time with the full weight of everything I felt and everything I had chosen not to say. I didn't bring this to this table to break you, I said. I brought it here because this table is where the truth belongs in this family. It always has been. Your mother insisted on that. I intend to honor it, and I walked to the kitchen to get the cobbler. Marcus and Tiffany left 40 minutes later. He did not make a scene on the way out. He shook Deo's hand, not because the moment called for it, but because some part of his raising held even in the worst moments, which I am choosing to take as the trace of something salvageable. He did not look at me when he put on his coat. Tiffany said, barely above a whisper, "Thank you for dinner, Mr. Whitfield," and I nodded and said, "Drive safe, Tiffany," because she had not forged anything and her road from here would be its own difficult thing. The door closed behind them. Renee appeared beside me in the entryway and took my hand without saying a word. We stood there for a moment together in the quiet of the house that her mother had loved, that her grandfather had helped me find the down payment for, that had held every significant moment of this family's life for 3 decades. "Daddy," she said finally. "I know," I said. "Are you okay?" I thought about that question honestly, the way it deserves to be thought about. "I will be," I said, and I meant it. What followed in the weeks after Christmas was not dramatic. The law does not move dramatically. It moves the way water moves, steadily, around every obstacle, finding the path that physics requires it to find. The bank's fraud referral resulted in a formal investigation that Marcus ultimately resolved through a negotiated agreement with the tolleant. With the prosecutor's office, no prison time, but a formal record, restitution requirements, and probationary conditions that would follow him for years. The civil claim was settled in February, with a structured repayment arrangement that Howard Delaney helped me draft in terms that were firm but not punitive, because punitive was never the point. Marcus lost the East Side Development Project entirely. The investors he had been courting, once the fraud became a matter of public record, withdrew their interest without ceremony. The Short North apartment, the $4,000 a month apartment with the art gallery coffee table, was vacated in January. Tiffany moved in with her sister in Dublin. Marcus moved into a 1-bedroom in Clintonville, which is a perfectly respectable neighborhood in Columbus and which he could afford on his own income, which turned out to be enough to live on when it was not being supplemented by resources borrowed without permission. He called me in February, on a Sunday evening. I answered. "Pop, Marcus," a long pause. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said. "I'm not calling to ask for that." "Then what are you calling for?" Another pause. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line. The breathing of a man who has been carrying something for a while and has not yet figured out how to set it down. "I'm calling because I need you to know that I know what I did," he said. Not the legal description of it, what I actually did. To you, to Mom's name, I know what it was. I sat with that for a moment. "I hear you," I said. "That's all I needed," he said. We said goodnight. We hung up. I sat in my office for a long time after that, with the lamp on and the rest of the house quiet, and I let myself feel the full, complicated weight of what it means to love someone and hold them accountable at the same time. It is not a clean feeling. It is not the satisfying clarity of a balance sheet that is finally reconciled. It is something more difficult and more human than that. It is the feeling of a man who did what he had to do and is not sure, even now, that doing the right thing and being at peace with it are the same experience. By the time the dogwoods bloomed on the street in front of my house, the legal matters were resolved and the routines of my life had resettled into their proper shape. I went to the office on Tuesdays and Thursdays, semi-retired, yes, but not absent, because the work matters to me, and I am not yet ready to be a man without work. I had Sunday breakfast with a group of men from my church, the Pleasant Hill Missionary Baptist Church on Livingston Avenue, where I have been a member since 1983, where I sing in the second tenor section of the choir, where Loretta's name is engraved on a pew in the third row because she gave 22 years of herself to that congregation and they wanted her to remain part of it. I established a scholarship in Loretta's name at the community college on the east side, the side of Columbus that Marcus's project had been supposed to serve before it became something else. 2 recipients per year for students pursuing degrees in business or finance. The endowment came, in part, from the restitution payments that Marcus's agreement required. I found a particular and private satisfaction in that, in the money that had been taken coming back not to me, but to something that would last. Renee calls every Sunday. We talk for at least 20 minutes. She tells me about the girls, about Deo, about the cases she cannot talk about in detail, but that clearly cost her something, the way work that matters always does. She asks if I have been eating. I tell her yes, and sometimes I am even telling the truth. She laughs her mother's laugh at that, and for a moment the distance between Atlanta and Columbus disappears entirely. Imani sent me a drawing in March, a crayon drawing, done on a piece of white paper torn from a notebook, of what I believe was intended to be my house, a square building with white lights along the roof, and a large wreath on the door, and a figure standing on the porch that had gray hair and was very tall. She had written at the bottom in the careful handwriting of a 9-year-old, "Grandpa's house." I framed it. It is on the wall of my office, beside the photograph of Loretta at our 25th anniversary dinner, and I look at both of them every morning when I sit down at my desk. The name Whitfield means something in this city. It means something because of the people who carried it before me, and because of the work I have spent my life doing to be worthy of it. It is not a resource. It is not collateral. It is not available for use without the knowledge and consent of the man who holds it. It never was. It never will be. And I am still here, still standing, still at the head of my own table. The legacy is intact. And the man they counted on being too old to notice, noticed everything. You stayed with me through all of it, through the silence and the waiting and the long, slow turning of the wheel. That means something to me that I am not going to dress up in more words than it requires. If this story touched something in you, if it reminded you of something you have protected, or something you almost lost, or someone you have loved in the complicated way that family demands, and you want to help this channel keep telling stories like this one, the link is in the description and right there in the comments. I am not the kind of man who asks twice. But I am the kind who recognizes the person who walked the whole road. And if you are still here, you walked it. And I receive it the same way I receive respect, with gratitude, and without making a production of it. Some people confuse patience with weakness. They look at a quiet man and decide that the quiet means he does not see. That because he does not shout, he does not know. That because he passes the cornbread and smiles and says, "We'll reschedule." The numbers have not already been counted, and the documents have not already been prepared, and the table has not already been set for a different kind of meal than the one they were planning to eat. A man who built his house brick by brick knows every brick. He knows which ones hold weight, and which ones are decorative, and which ones, if removed, would bring the whole thing down. He does not need to announce that knowledge. He does not need to perform it. He simply needs to know it. And when someone reaches for a brick that does not belong to them, he knows exactly which one they have chosen, and exactly what to do next. What would you have done? If you had sat at that table, with the documents in your jacket and the truth in your chest, and the person who had betrayed you across from you, raising a glass to your generosity, would you have confronted them privately before the family arrived? Or did they need to see it? Did the truth need witnesses? Tell me what you think below. And one more question, because it is the one I still think about on quiet evenings. Do you believe there is a way back from something like this? Between a father and a son? I do not know the answer yet. I am still living toward it. If you believe that dignity is not loud, but it is permanent. If you believe that patience is not passivity, but is the highest form of strategy available to a man of character, then you know what this channel is about and you know why these stories matter. Hit subscribe and stay close. I will be here next week with another one. And I thank you, genuinely, not as a formality, for walking this road with me today.